her career has had so much pressure because she was one of the first people that could be considered mainstream. That's a woman of color in literature, and how she, as much as her work was very much tied to and inspired by her background, she really wanted to be seen as an American author, not just a Chinese American author, an Asian American author.
Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of Pop Culture Planet. Today we are speaking with creatives behind the documentary Amy Tan, Unintended Memoir, which just premiered at Sundance Film Festival. I'm joined by producer Cassandra Jabola and editor Jeff Boyette. Enjoy our conversation. For each of you, what kind of inspired you to want to be a part of, bringing Amy Tan's memoir and documentary to life?
We had worked with our director, Jamie Redford. Each of us had worked with him for the better part of a decade, and he brought us onto the film because we were working on another film right before that with him, Playing for Keeps, about the importance of play for children, adults, and seniors for mental and physical health. And when he told us about this film and asked us to be on it, I mean, first of all, we wanted to continue to work with him and the great teams that he puts together. But of course, Amy Tan is an amazing world famous author, and it just seemed like it would be a fantastic story. And that was before we even knew how multi-layered her story actually is.
I mean, I was really honored that he asked me in the first place. I'd known him for years and edited lots of small projects for him over the years. And then in the last few years was able to help him finish one of his films, Happening, which Cassandra also produced. And then that bridged over to the play movie. And Jamie, I wouldn't say stumbled, but it wasn't exactly something he set out to do to make this movie. He met Amy. They'd known each other on and off for a while, but he met her to interview her for this play movie. And that interview was just so incredible for him that they went way beyond where they started. And he went to his producer partner, Karen, and said, "What do you think?" Or I think it might have been her idea to actually do a doc just about her. So we'd already had this, been working together, and so it just kind of worked out that we had the working relationship, and he invited me in. And I mean, there's just her story is just so deep, and I think there's so many layers that there's something for pretty much everyone to connect with. And she's such an incredible storyteller that I just feel really lucky to have been the person who got to edit it with Jamie and with Cassandra.
We learned so much more about her and her work as we made the film, but I had known about, I was very familiar with the Joy Luck Club since I was a kid. It's so iconic, the story, and especially being, Asian American, it really resonated with me. And as soon as I made the connection, I was just like, oh, there's no way I wouldn't work on this.
What I think is so great about this project is like you guys said, it just goes so deep. I felt like you're just watching this honest portrayal of someone just like expressing the things that they've dealt with. And I think what's really interesting is just to see how Amy's life and writing are influenced by her family. And I'd love to hear just a little bit more about the balance in the film of Amy's experience as an Asian American and the Chinese culture that her family comes from, and how you guys kind of like balanced that in the film.
It's interesting because there's a part in the film where she talks about like kind of getting typecast once she gets famous as being Asian American and trying to want to be known more as just a writer. And yet the reality is her experience was very much colored by the fact that her mother came from China. She grew up around a lot. She was in a lot of communities that were very mixed race from Oakland and around the Bay Area. So anyway, but that experience was very much a part of it. So it was a big deal for us to, make it relevant for people who had a similar experience. So that's why I think having Cassandra on the team, and really she was kind of my primary, collaborator on a lot of the story questions as we developed it, because it's something that is unique to, something that there are elements that I could relate to, just someone who grew up in the Bay Area, but beyond that, and someone who has a mother and, can relate on a lot of those levels, but there's a lot that I can't relate to. And so having Cassandra on the team, and a few other people who were able to give input who had more similar background was really key, because we wanted so many people were inspired for her because she was a woman of color writing. We wanted to be able to, relate to people.
It's very multi-layered because of the fact that her story goes back generations. So there's generational trauma from her mother and her grandmother, and the Chinese tradition of concubinage. And then there's also the layers of coming here, her parents being immigrants and her being first generation, and growing up in that time period, the 50s and the 60s, which was the time of conformity in America. And it was just something that I could directly relate to with my family. My family is Filipino American, and even though they're not Chinese American, there were just so many parallels in the story of, coming to America and trying to make a better life, and putting a lot of pressure on children to carry that out because of the sacrifices that were made to even get here. And then also, like Jeff said, balancing that with the fact that we talk about, well, Amy talks about in the film how her career has had so much pressure because she was one of the first people that could be considered mainstream. That's a woman of color in literature, and how she, as much as her work was very much tied to and inspired by her background, she really wanted to be seen as an American author, not just a Chinese American author, an Asian American author.
Absolutely. I think that's something that a lot of people can relate to. And I think what was so great about this story is that you get to see so many facets. So yes, you're seeing, the generational trauma, but also you get to see some fun things like her author band, which was, the whole time I'm watching this movie, I'm just like, wow, Amy Tan is so cool. Like, I just wish that I could be her friend. She just seems like such a cool person to follow. And so I'm wondering, from working on this project, like Amy-wise, but also production-wise, was there anything just surprising that you learned working on this film?
I was definitely surprised by her many, many talents, because we already know that she is a very talented and skillful writer, but to find out that she could also draw and paint really well, the bird drawings. She's an amazing piano player too. Things like that really surprised me.
It's so amazing when you listen to like some of the interviews that Jamie did with her, when he sat down and looked through her photos, because she would just find something and then just kind of offhand refer to it like, this is more on the negative experience, but she'd be like, this is right after my mom turned all the furniture upside down in the house. And then she'd put the photo down and then she'd move on. And Jamie would be like, wait, what was that? What was that story? And there are these things that for her, she's just sort of internalized and become so comfortable talking about, that for anyone else, it's just like, whoa, I want to hear that story again. And yeah, the depth of her, we had a little segment in the film where we show some of her hobbies. The band is, of course, the big one. But, she'll do these things where she'll go off and look for venomous snakes just with botanists, just for the fun of it, or not botanists, but with, scientists, just because she has the opportunity. She's just this sort of, she loves risk, she loves adventure. And there's something so, I don't know, it's just inspiring and fun about that. And she still talks about it as if it's just, that's just what she does because it's fun. And, diving with whale sharks, it's just things like that are just incredible. And those photos weren't the only time. It wasn't like she did a one-off trip. Like, she's gone out and done that multiple times. She's just a very kind of fun, adventurous person, but it talks about it in such a humble way that you feel like you can kind of sit down and hang out with her. Like you said, we all want to be your friend. And absolutely. The bird watching was cool for me because I'm a kind of a bird nerd myself. And so I was really happy that got to be a kind of a nice element to the finish of the film.
This is a person who has such a full life, that has done so many interesting things, that just has such an incredible story. As someone, who's putting together a documentary, how do you decide what to keep and what to leave? Like, I'm sure there's probably enough to make multiple films because it's just so much to dive into. Yeah,
that is one of the toughest things in documentary, and especially in Amy's case, because her story is so rich with beautiful things, painful things. There really was a lot that we left out that was interesting and could have been even a second film. But Jeff can really speak to how we decided on the structure and what made sense to keep and what made sense to not keep.
Right off the bat, I think we felt that the core story arc, there was a lot to her life, and we didn't want to downplay some of these other aspects or ignore them. But the relationship with her mother was so pivotal to how she became famous. It was at the core of all of her writing. Pretty much all of her books have some connection, even the ones that are kind of, you might think of as the least relevant to her family life. There's always some relationship to her mom, or some manifesting of her mom in some of the characters. And it was so pivotal to how she, talked about her life in her memoir, Where the Past Begins, that we kind of knew that relationship had to be at the core. And it was something we all related to. And I think it's a big part of why her book was so successful and her subsequent books were so successful. So that was kind of where we set up the broad arc. And then we just tried to balance the other elements against it. And it did mean, I think a different approach that would have been more about her career there were a lot of other things that would have been included. Like she wrote the libretto for an opera based on her book, The Bonesetter's Daughter. And that's like a big deal, but it happened kind of after her mom had died. And the way that the last third of the film was structured, it just didn't end up, there wasn't really a place for that without kind of a tangent at the point of the film when we really wanted to kind of move forward and find this closure. So there are a lot of things like that were significant to her professional career that we kind of had to leave aside.
And now I'm curious for you guys respectively, what has drawn you to producing and editing?
For me, I have a background in broadcast journalism, actually, and that is what led me to documentary production, because I was basically learning how to make news stories in school. And I found that you get the what, but you don't really get the why, and you don't get to delve in as deeply. And also, we were taught that in the news, you have to be nonpartisan and just present the facts to the people. But I found that all the news orgs really lean one way or another. And I thought, well, there's got to be a way to, if you're just supposed to be presenting information and you're not supposed to be trying to convince people one way or another, what's the point? And I discovered documentary and long form versus short form, and that you could actually make it cinematic, and that doing that is actually what causes people to feel. And that is what can impact change. So that's really why I got into it, telling stories for social impact.
I was obsessed with photography as a kid in high school. And somehow that led to taking a video class. That was sort of the inadvertent step that led to thinking, wow, film is even cooler than photography. And editing just, I think, kind of fits my temperament well. And so I just kind of kept following a path towards editing. But what I've just totally loved about it, and why I just feel really lucky that I can do this, is just you get exposed to things you can't, like no one life, there are so many things you might want to do in a life and you can't. But as an editor, you get to, for these short periods of time, kind of experience someone else's life, see things through their eyes, get a different perspective, or see a different place. If a film takes place in a different city or a different country, you get to kind of live vicariously for a short amount of time through the footage and through these other people's experiences. And what you see in the final film is 90 or 100 minutes, but I get to see as the editor is so much more than that. So I feel like I get this special window into other people's lives, and I feel like I learn a lot, and I get to, like I said, experience things that maybe I aspire to but could never actually do myself. So yeah, it's a pretty awesome job.
That's beautiful. I love that.
You get to learn so much about whatever your subject is, whether it's an issue or a story or a person. We just immerse ourselves in it. We read a bunch of Amy's books. Watched every minute of interview footage. It really is so immersive. On top of which, like Jeff said, getting into her life, because she generously shared her entire family archive with us, photos, film, negatives, going back decades.
Yeah. And this was just a special treat in that regard, because I feel like, you when you start a movie and you start an edit, it's not like a foregone conclusion that it's going to work out, it's going to be good. You have to actually, make that happen. And in this case, it kind of was a foregone conclusion, because she had already written her memoir. She already had a feature film. I mean, her life was so full of interesting stories, and she herself was an amazing storyteller and was a part of it. So it was sort of like, we had all of this incredible storytelling already from the get-go, and we just had to kind of put it into a film form that worked for the documentary format. And so it was really a pleasure to be able to do it. I think a lot of other films, you don't have quite so much to start with that helps you along the way. You have to figure it out more from scratch.
Would you say that working on this was like a pretty collaborative experience with Amy?
The filming of it was, but in post-production, it was really important to our director, Jamie, to really get far enough in the edit where you could see the story coming together before showing it to her, because we really it was important to him and to us to do her story justice and to have her approval. I mean, of course, she had already agreed to make this film with us, but before we showed her the edit, we showed it to her before it was finished, but in more or less a complete state. And yeah, that then after that, it's been very collaborative in terms of helping get the film out there and, getting her opinion on certain things. Did we get this right? Did we get that right? But she wasn't in the edit with us every day.
What made it so special, that I think what really lifts this film up for people is the rapport that Jamie and Amy had from that day one, that first interview that wasn't even intended to be about her in terms of a biopic, and they just had this relationship that just, people comment on that immediately when they see it. Like, I cannot believe the connection she had with him, and they had several sessions like that. She never wanted to be like followed around with the camera or anything like that. And so she kind of wanted, she's like, sure, if you want to do that, fine, I'll sit down, I'll do an interview. She didn't really want to, but every time they did get together, there was just this connection. They were able to talk, and she was able to open up. And so in that sense, those moments, even though it's really only a handful of sessions that he did with her, were, provided so much depth that really made the film what it is, why it feels so intimate to viewers. And then once she did see it, she was extremely supportive. She came back and recorded all the VO that we did. That was originally from her audiobooks. She came back and did a VO record with us where she reread everything. And she, along the way, started uncovering these boxes, and she'd call Jamie and say, do you want these? And be like, yes, please. And he'd come over and they'd go through boxes together. And so, yeah, along the way, she kept kind of shoveling more stuff to us. And so she was very supportive, but also, like Cassandra said, not sort of present during the edit, which was, I think, also important.
It takes, in any documentary, it takes a lot of trust between the filmmakers and the crew and the subject. And I think the film wouldn't be what it was if they didn't have the trust between them, because they had started as friends years ago. And then, as we mentioned, Jamie tapped Amy to be in that other film. And then from there, our producer Karen thought, her story is so rich, it needs to be its own film. And they pitched it to Amy, and she said yes. And she wouldn't have picked just anyone, because you are so exposed and vulnerable when you let the world into your life. And it was very important for Jamie to have her tell her story in her own words, like not through someone else's perspective, only through her words and from her perspective. And the way he interviews people and just gets them to open up, and he's just a great listener. And I think that really led to us having such authentic interviews with her.
It looked like she really opened up. This felt like one of the most honest and just open documentaries I've ever seen, where she's just matter of fact telling you, about her life. Nothing really held back. So, I mean, I think it definitely came across. And what do you guys hope that people take away from this film?
I hope people go and call their mom, and it was amazing to me that Amy sat down and interviewed her mom on video so many times. Like, people don't do that. I think there's, this multi-generational knowledge that she has kind of collected in her collected works and in her memoirs. And now in this film, that's something that we all kind of have access to but don't necessarily take advantage of.
Right. And I think along with family being a huge theme, both in our film and in all of Amy's works, I think the other message, which is really her own personal message in her journey, is that in order to do your own art, whatever that is, or whatever thing that you do creatively, you have to be true to yourself and not do it for others or because of the pressure of others, or if others have put you down and said that you can't do it, people saying that she wasn't creative, or teachers of hers, or putting her in a box, and just breaking out of that, I think, is something that anybody can learn from, for example.
Well, thank you guys so much for your time. I thought this was such a beautifully done documentary, so I really appreciate you taking the time to speak with me about it, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, it means so much to hear your feedback on the film.
If you guys like this one, you can check out more Pop Culture Planet right over here, and I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.